The fork slipped from my hand and struck the edge of the plate. A small metallic sound that somehow cut through everything. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. The roast sat untouched in the center of the table. Candlelight trembled against the silver cutlery, throwing soft, uneven shadows across the faces of the people I had once thought of as my home. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes cold as stone. "You can take the guest room," he said, voice low but sharp, "or move out." The words hung there, suspended in the air like frost. My mother's hands froze around her wine glass. My brother Justin was quick to fill the silence. "Better if you're gone by tomorrow," he said too quickly, too eagerly. For a moment I thought I had misheard. I had spent years covering this household's bills, electric, repairs, groceries, even the new fridge that hummed quietly behind us. I was the one who wrote checks when things broke, who answered calls when the bank came close to repossession. And yet, here I was, being given a choice between a guest room or exile. The candlelight wavered again, reflected in the wine glass in front of me. My father's eyes didn't move. He'd already decided. I swallowed hard. My voice came out rough, half-broken. "I've been paying most of the bills. You know that, right? The house, the water heater, everything." Justin smirked, leaning back in his chair like he was watching a show. "Yeah, we know. Doesn't mean you get to stay forever, Dorothy." My mother still hadn't looked up, her knife pressed gently against her roast, carving nothing, just moving for the sake of motion. I turned to her. "Mom? Nothing. Not even a glance." It felt like the air had thinned, like oxygen itself had chosen a side. Dad lifted his hand, one small, impatient gesture. "It's decided." That's when something inside me stopped fighting. I looked around the table one last time. My father's rigid posture, my brother's victorious grin, his wife, sitting just beside him, eyes gleaming with quiet triumph, her red nails tracing circles around the rim of her glass. The roast still untouched. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the tile, a harsh final sound. "Fine," I said. My voice trembled but didn't break. "I'm gone." The silence that followed was almost gentle. I could hear the clock ticking from the hallway, the dog barking somewhere outside. My mother's breath caught like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I left my plate where it was, the fork resting against it like a white flag. When I stepped into the hallway, the walls seemed smaller than I remembered. Every photograph I passed, birthday parties, graduations, my father's arm around Justin's shoulder, looked like a version of us that no longer existed. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and disappointment. In my childhood room, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed to my face. It wasn't the first time they had made me feel like an intruder in my own life, but it was the first time they said it out loud. The night outside was windless, heavy. From my window, the porch light spilled across the front lawn like a dim memory. I started to pack. The TV I bought, the couch from my first apartment, the coffee maker that had brewed every morning's start, even the small rug I'd once placed near the fireplace. Every item had a story, a cost, a small piece of me stitched into it. Each time I carried something to the car, the emptiness inside the house deepened. When I took the last box out, I paused at the doorway. My mother's knitting lay half-finished on the armchair. A single loop of yarn hung loose, swaying faintly. For a second, I almost turned back, almost waited for her to say something, but she didn't. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt like a full stop. The street was quiet, the air sharp with early autumn. I loaded the last of my things into the trunk and stood there for a moment, watching my breath turn pale in the cold. Somewhere inside that house, my brother and his wife were probably laughing now. My father might already be pouring himself another drink. My mother would still be sitting at the table, staring at her plate. I had kept their lights on for years. Now I was the one stepping into darkness. As I drove away, the headlights cut through the night like two thin blades. Every mile between me and that house felt both heavier and lighter. I didn't cry, not then. The tears would come later, in the small hours of the morning, when the silence grew too big to fill. I stopped once, at a gas station outside the city. Bought coffee, though I didn't need it. The attendant smiled and said, "Long night?" I nodded. That was all. Back on the road, I watched the city lights fade behind me, until only the stars remained. When I reached my apartment, a place that still smelled faintly of new paint and unmade memories, I dropped the boxes in the living room and sat on the floor. The silence pressed in, but it didn't feel cruel. It was a silence I could own. I looked around at the things I'd saved. The couch, the small table, the coffee maker, all the pieces I'd once bought for a home that wasn't mine. Now they were here, with me. I made myself a cup of coffee, even though it was past midnight. The sound of the machine was soft and steady, grounding me. Outside, a faint breeze rattled the windows. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. I thought about my father's voice, about the way he didn't hesitate, about my mother's silence, about Justin's smirk, and then I thought about the years I'd spent holding that family together, like glue no one noticed until it cracked. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, feeling the warmth bleed into my skin. Maybe this was what freedom sounded like, a low hum in an empty room. When I finally lay down, the city was sleeping, and I whispered into the dark, "Fine, I'm gone." This time, it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like a beginning. Eleanor woke before dawn, her body heavy yet her mind restless. The faint silver of morning light filtered through the curtains, slicing the room into fragments of soft blue and gray. For a few still moments she lay in bed, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, as though the house itself were slowly waking with her. She reached for her phone, not to check messages, there were none she wanted, but to see the time. By the time I met, the air felt different that morning. Not colder, not warmer, just waiting. Downstairs, the silence was thick. Even the old grandfather clock in the hall seemed hesitant to tick. She brewed coffee, the scent spreading through the kitchen like a quiet ritual. The first sip steadied her heartbeat, but her thoughts were already elsewhere, back on the letter. It had arrived 3 days ago, handwritten in dark ink, the paper folded twice with deliberate care. The signature had been impossible to ignore. "Elle, it's time we talked. Come to the house. I'll explain everything. Elle." She hadn't seen Leo in 4 years. Not since that night the sea took their father and half their family's name with him. The old house by the coast was the last place she wanted to return to. But something about the letter, the certainty of it, the way it didn't ask, only told, had burrowed into her. By the time the sun broke fully across the horizon, she had already made up her mind. She packed lightly, 1 suitcase, a few dresses, her father's compass. She still couldn't bring herself to throw away. As she zipped the bag, her eyes caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked older than she felt, maybe because she'd spent so long pretending she wasn't still broken. The drive to the coast was quiet. The road stretched endlessly between fields of gold and shadow, the early fog dissolving like breath on glass. Every turn brought her closer to the past she'd buried. She remembered being a child in the back seat, her mother humming softly while Leo leaned out the window, hair whipping in the wind. Back then, the house had seemed enormous and bright, a fortress of summer light. But when their father drowned, that brightness sank with him. Now, as she neared the familiar cliffs, her stomach tightened. The house stood alone on the edge of the sea, its white paint weathered to gray, its windows glinting like old eyes. She parked by the gate and just sat there, fingers gripping the steering wheel. The sound of the waves rose faintly from below, a constant hush that felt like memory itself. Leo's car was already in the drive. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she forced herself out, suitcase in hand, and started up the path. Gravel crunched beneath her shoes. The air smelled of salt and wildflowers. She reached the porch and hesitated before knocking. The door creaked open before she could. He stood there, older, leaner, his eyes shadowed by years of something unspoken. For a heartbeat, neither said a word. The silence between them stretched and folded, filled with ghosts. "Eleanor," he said finally. His voice was low, cautious. "You came," she nodded. "You asked?" A faint smile ghosted across his face. "I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I." He stepped aside and she entered. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt familiar. The old portraits still hung in the hallway, their painted faces watching her as she passed. The grandfather clock ticked again, alive in its waiting. In the living room, sunlight spilled through lace curtains, pooling across the floorboards. Leo motioned for her to sit. On the coffee table lay an envelope, larger, sealed, old. Her eyes flicked toward it. He noticed. "That's part of why I asked you here," he said softly. Eleanor's breath caught. "Part? There's more," he said. "Something I should have told you long ago." She stared at him. "Then tell me." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crossed to the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks far below. "Do you remember the night Father left for his last voyage?" Her throat tightened. "Of course I do." He turned back to her, expression unreadable. "Then you know he didn't just drown." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. The light dimmed slightly. Or maybe it was her vision narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Leo hesitated, then said quietly, "He was running from something. And it wasn't the storm." Her heartbeat stumbled. "Running from what?" He looked down at his hands, then back up. "From someone." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. The waves below sounded louder now, closer somehow. Eleanor felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "Leo," she whispered. "What did you find?" He didn't reply. Not yet. He only picked up the envelope and held it out to her. The seal was marked with the same insignia their father once wore on his signet ring, a half-moon carved through a wave. Her hands trembled as she took it. The wax cracked under her fingers. Inside was a letter, dated the night before their father's ship vanished. As her eyes moved across the page, the words blurred together. Phrases that shouldn't have existed, names she didn't recognize, and one sentence that made her chest seize. "If they find me, the house will not be safe. Protect her. She must never know what's beneath it." Eleanor looked up slowly. "What's beneath the house, Leo?" His expression darkened. "That," he said, "is what I need to show you." And somewhere, beneath the hum of the sea and the whisper of wind, she thought she heard something else, something deep, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the floorboards, the calm before the storm had ended. The air inside the house seemed to change after Leo's words, thicker somehow, as if it carried the weight of years buried beneath the floorboards. Eleanor stood there, the letter still trembling in her hands, her pulse echoing the faint rhythm she thought she'd imagined. "Beneath the house?" she repeated, her voice almost swallowed by the vast quiet around them. Leo nodded once, his gaze fixed on the floorboards between them. "It's not a metaphor, Elle. He meant it literally." He turned toward the hallway, motioning for her to follow. The floor creaked under their steps as they moved deeper into the house. Each room they passed felt untouched, like a museum of their childhood, dusted but unmoved. The faded portraits, the stiff curtains, the piano their mother used to play but hadn't touched since their father disappeared. At the end of the hall, Leo stopped before a narrow door Eleanor didn't remember ever seeing. "That wasn't there before," she whispered. "It was," he said, "just hidden. Father built over it when we were kids." Leo crouched and pressed his hand against the lower panel. A small metal latch clicked open. The sound was sharp, final. When he pulled the door open, a gust of air rose from the darkness below, cool, damp, and ancient. A staircase spiraled down into blackness. Eleanor hesitated on the threshold. "Leo, what is this?" He looked back at her. "I don't know everything yet, but I think he built something down there, something he was trying to protect, or hide." The word hide hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt the chill creep across her arms as she stepped forward. The wooden steps groaned beneath her weight, their edges soft with years of moisture. The smell of earth and salt filled her lungs. Leo followed close behind, holding a small lantern that flickered weakly, casting trembling light along the stone walls. At the bottom, the narrow tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The walls were carved rock, uneven but deliberate, reinforced with beams that looked hand-cut. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, rhythmic and hollow. And there, At the center stood an iron chest, sealed with the same crescent insignia from the letter. Eleanor froze. "He built this?" Leo nodded. "And he wanted no one to find it." They approached it slowly. The chest was thick, rust blooming around its edges. Leo knelt, running his fingers over the symbol. "He must have used this as a vault," he murmured. "But for what?" Eleanor crouched beside him, brushing away dust and cobwebs. There was a faint hum beneath her fingertips. So subtle she almost doubted it. "Did you feel that?" she asked quietly. Leo frowned. "Feel what?" She placed her hand flat against the metal. The vibration pulsed again, steady, almost alive. "That." He pressed his hand beside hers. A moment later, his eyes widened. "It's not the sea. It's coming from inside." For a long moment, they just knelt there listening. Then Leo exhaled and stood. "Help me lift it." The hinges resisted at first, screaming in protest as if the chest itself didn't want to be opened. When it finally gave way, a cloud of dust rose into the air, shimmering in the lantern light. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and brittle paper, lay 3 objects: a small black journal bound in leather, a tarnished pocket watch, identical to the one their father used to carry, and a metal key unlike any they had ever seen. Long, curved, engraved with faint runes that caught the light and shimmered briefly before dulling again. Eleanor reached for the journal. It was cold to the touch. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was their father's, familiar, precise, trembling slightly near the end. The first page read, "To whoever finds this, know that what lies beneath this house must never surface." The sea took what it demanded, but the debt remains unpaid. Eleanor looked up at Leo. "What debt?" He shook his head, taking the watch in his hand. It ticked once, then stopped. "There's more here," he murmured, turning the pages. Sketches of the coastline filled the margins, diagrams of tunnels, symbols she didn't recognize, notes written in haste. One page was marked with a single line that sent a chill through her spine. "It moves when the tide changes." "The tide?" she whispered. "What does he mean?" Leo didn't answer. He turned toward the far wall, where faint lines of chalk traced an outline in the stone. The lantern light revealed something that looked like a door. Small, sealed shut, its edges lined with the same half-moon emblem. The rhythmic sound beneath the floor grew louder. Eleanor took a step back. "Leo, don't!" But he was already reaching for the metal key. "He left this for a reason," he said. "If we don't find out what he was protecting, someone else will." The key fit perfectly into the stone slot. When he turned it, a low groan echoed through the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sound of the sea deepened into a roar. And then, from behind the stone door, something shifted. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a slow, heavy movement, like something stirring after a long sleep. Eleanor's voice broke. "Leo, stop," he froze. But the door kept moving. A line of cold air spilled out from the crack, sharp with salt, and something metallic. The lantern flickered once, twice, then went out. In the dark, she could hear the tide pounding against the cliffs. Only now it didn't sound like water anymore. "It sounded like breathing, Leo," she whispered. He didn't answer. Her fingers brushed his arm. He was still there, but he was trembling. And beneath them, the hum had grown stronger, becoming a vibration that throbbed through the floor, through their bones, through the air itself. Then just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Only the faint echo of her own heartbeat filled the void. Leo fumbled with the lantern, and after a moment of static sparks, the flame caught again. The stone door stood half open. Beyond it was not another chamber, but a narrow passage descending further, much deeper than the foundation should have gone. The air coming from it was colder now, laced with a scent she couldn't name. Eleanor stared into the darkness. "What did Father do?" Leo looked at her, his eyes pale in the light. "He built a house," he said softly. "But maybe not for us." The silence stretched. Somewhere deep below, the faintest sound echoed up the passage, slow, deliberate, almost like footsteps rising from the deep. Eleanor gripped the journal tightly against her chest. "We need to go," she whispered. But Leo didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the black mouth of the passage. "It's calling," he murmured. And then, with a strange, quiet calm, he took a step forward. Eleanor didn't remember deciding to follow him, only the sight of his back vanishing into the dark, the faint glow of the lantern swinging like a heartbeat ahead of her. Her voice caught in her throat when she tried to call his name. The sound died in the heavy air before it could reach him. She gripped the cold stone wall and began to descend. The steps wound downward, carved unevenly from rock that glittered faintly as though wet. The air grew colder the deeper she went, and the smell, salt, iron, and something faintly sweet, thickened until it clung to her throat. "Leo," she tried again, her voice smaller than the echoes it created. "Just a bit further," he called back. His tone was steady, but there was something in it, a tremor of awe or fear or both. When she reached the bottom, the tunnel widened into another chamber, larger than the first. The ceiling was domed, the walls slick with moisture. Strange marks, spirals, crescent lines, and shapes like waves folding into themselves had been etched across the stone. In the center of the room was a shallow pool of water, perfectly still despite the faint vibration beneath the earth. Leo stood at its edge, the lantern light trembling in his hand. "This is it," he said softly. "This is what he built over." Eleanor approached slowly. The surface of the pool reflected their faces like glass, though the reflection seemed slightly delayed, as if it moved a fraction slower than reality. Her heart tightened. "It's just water," she whispered. Leo shook his head. "No, it's more than that." He crouched and touched the surface. The moment his fingers broke it, the water rippled, and the hum returned, rising from the ground, the walls, the air around them. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly blue, like moonlight trapped in stone. Eleanor took a step back. "Leo, stop." He didn't hear her. Or maybe he did and couldn't. His eyes were wide, locked on the pool as the ripples spread outward, slower and slower until they froze again, only now, there was something else visible below the surface. Shapes. Long, pale, curved shapes like ribs or the bones of a ship. Half buried beneath the rock, Eleanor's breath caught. "What is that?" Leo's voice trembled. He said the sea took him. Maybe he wasn't lying. Before she could speak, the pool shuddered. The surface broke open, not violently, but in a soundless widening motion, as if something beneath it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. The lantern flickered, then dimmed to a whisper of light. And from the center of the pool rose a faint, luminous mist. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't water vapor. It was memory. That was the only way Eleanor could describe it. The air shimmered, and images began to take shape. Their father, standing at the edge of this very pool, holding the same journal now clutched in her hands. His expression was strained, desperate. He was speaking, but no sound came. Then another figure appeared beside him. A woman, or something shaped like one. Her skin shimmered like the surface of the sea at midnight. Her eyes were pale, endless, unhuman. Their father reached for her, and the image dissolved in light. Eleanor stumbled back. What was that? Leo was staring at the water, pale and silent. "He made a bargain," he said finally, voice barely a whisper. He wasn't running from something. He was running to her. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her ears. That's not possible. But even as she said it, the hum deepened. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and the water began to rise, not spilling, but lifting, holding itself in a column that shimmered like glass. Within it, a faint outline appeared. Half man, half shadow, the shape of someone reaching upward, her father's face. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard his voice. Not safe. The debt. Then the image fractured. The column of water burst outward in a silent wave, drenching the room in cold mist. The lantern died. The hum became a roar. "Leo!" she shouted, grabbing his arm. But he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the center of the pool, wide, unblinking. "Do you hear it?" he murmured. "He's not gone." "Leo, we need to leave." But he was already stepping forward. The water, impossibly, didn't ripple as his boots touched it. It accepted him, welcomed him. Eleanor lunged to pull him back, but his hand slipped from hers. For an instant, he turned toward her, and she saw something. Peace, or surrender, or maybe recognition. Then the light engulfed him, and he was gone. The chamber fell silent again. Only the still pool remained, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting her own trembling face. Eleanor fell to her knees. The journal had slipped from her grasp. Its pages fluttered open, and a loose note fell out. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was a single line, scrawled in her father's handwriting. "Blood remembers what stone forgets." Her breath came in shallow bursts. The pool gave a faint, soundless pulse, once, then again, and then she heard it. Faint, beneath the waves, beneath the earth, Leo's voice. Calling her name, Eleanor. She backed away, stumbling up the steps, clutching the journal to her chest. The sound followed her up the tunnel, rising with the hum that now filled the walls. By the time she reached the narrow door at the top, the morning light had shifted, gray now, with the sea raging beyond the cliffs. She slammed the door shut behind her and fell against it, gasping. The old house groaned, as though something deep beneath it was stirring awake. She looked around the hallway, familiar, ordinary, sunlit, and felt the crushing weight of how wrong that was. Nothing would ever be ordinary again. Her father had built the house over something alive. And now, she realized with a hollow certainty, it wasn't sleeping anymore. Eleanor turned toward the front door. The wind had risen outside, and the waves crashed violently against the cliffs. She stepped onto the porch and looked toward the horizon. Far out at sea, where the sun should have been rising, the water glowed faintly, pale, silver, breathing. The journal hung heavy in her hands. She whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry, Leo." And somewhere beneath the cliffs, the hum answered, soft, patient, ancient. It would wait. It always waited.